Hello, and welcome to Leadership in Challenging Times on the NorQuest College podcast. Hosted by Dr. Jody Abbott, President and CEO of NorQuest College, and Lieutenant Colonel J.C. Wilson, 3rd Canadian Division Headquarters with the Canadian Army, this podcast will discuss challenging and difficult topics affecting community, business, and soldiers alike. The presenters may at times express their personal opinion or take a contrary position to expand the conversation, ranging from leadership to sensitive subjects to current affairs. The podcast will tackle issues in an open manner with an eye on identifying and expanding ideas from all sides of the discussion. Jody and Jeff will now start the podcast.
Welcome everybody, episode 9. We've got some great guests in here with us today. And without further ado, Jody, do you want to?
Certainly. I'm going to have people introduce themselves, but today we have Linda Huang and Mac Mail with us. Both are very, very well known in the social media environment, and our topic today is social media. And as you know, we talk about leadership in challenging times, and so we're going to have conversation today about what works, what doesn't. Where do you go forward? Where do you back up? How do you get yourself out of trouble, etc.? So really pleased to have you here today. And Linda, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Linda Huang, and I am a digital social media strategist at Calder Bateman Communications. We are a marketing, advertising, creative agency here in the city, and I'm also an Edmonton blogger and passionate social media person. Always on my phone.
Thank you very much, yes. Linda. And Mac.
Mac Mail. I am the co-founder of Taproot Edmonton, which is a local membership-based, curiosity-driven source of stories about our city. And I'm a longtime social media user in the city. My Twitter claim to fame is I was one of the first 1,000 people in the world on Twitter. So I've been using it for a very long time, blogging for a very long time.
He's the real deal.
I think I'm the last 1,000 person to do it, so from my perspective. So that sort of sets the condition for our discussion so far. But I think we wanted to shape today's discussions really talking about from a leadership perspective. You're a new manager. You're just coming to terms with social media. I mean, maybe we start off with that, Mac. We start with you. Social media. What does that mean to a business or people? And then obviously from a communications point of view, I know you're going to jump in, but Mac.
I mean, social media is changing all the time is part of it. So talking about adapting to new things, Twitter, which launched in 2006, is a different animal today than it was when it started. So it's very difficult to look at social media except for a snapshot in time and say this is what it's about. But at base level, what social media gives people is the means of production. So all of us can be, creating content and distributing that content to thousands, hundreds, millions of people, whereas in the past, those methods of distribution were much more tightly controlled by a few organizations. So that's a real big difference. It means, the metaphorical megaphone is now in everyone's hands. And that's one of the interesting opportunities that social media gives us, this diversity of voices and of opinions and perspectives that we just did not have access to before. But it also is the double-edged sword of too much noise or potentially using it for not so great purposes.
Yeah.
So interesting for me, I started at the college 8 years ago and I knew very little about social media. And of course, a lot has changed. So if you're someone who is not engaged in social media and you're a new manager, for example, at NorQuest College or in the Canadian military, how would you recommend somebody get started? Because I had, luckily, some great communications people who said, here's how we set you up, here's how you get going. And I would say I'm not great in using social media. I would say I probably just skim the surface and I think I should tweak today, so I do. But how do you get started?
Yeah, so I mean, to your point, I think a lot of managers or people in leadership positions have that opportunity to utilize the smart people around them. So likely, even if you do not have experience with social, assuming that someone on your team does, training is I think invaluable. So at Calder Bateman, a lot of the work that I do is provide social media training of all levels and ranges to organizations, leaders, people in different positions, and it really does range from the very basic. This is how you open the app, and this is the navigation, and getting them feeling comfortable with that, making sure they're clicking through and well, what's this and what's this icon? Feeling more comfortable with that, and then going into, well, this is the type of things you could post. These are sort of the features that you could use. I really think the research aspect of it, I call it creeping. So when you're new to social media, I think something that's really valuable is just taking some time to just listen. Even when you're using social media, listening should be a huge part of what you're doing, not just shouting. But I find it very helpful for people who are trying to understand the platform or learn what they should be sharing, is to just hop on there, maybe a little anonymously at first, and just watch what people are saying, watch how people engage with each other, watch how they're sharing content. Is it photos? Is it videos? Whatever it is, and just kind of sort of absorb all of that, and then start planning. So I think from an organizational perspective, that plan, that strategy that you have for whether it's your organization using social or whether it's your CEO using social, having something written down, some type of roadmap, something, even if it's a couple of bullet points that says you can talk about these 3 things to start, and then kind of grow from there, is really helpful to get started.
And just to add on to that, if I could, I think everything you just said is true. And the only other suggestion I would make is forget that it's social media. If you're a new manager and you have to learn how to do a budget, or you have to learn how to do one-to-ones, or you have to learn how to do an appraisal or something, how do you learn to do those things? You pay attention to other people that have done it. You learn from them. You have to practice. You have to persevere and do it consistently. All of those same things that we do to learn any of the skills that we need to take on as managers apply to social media.
Absolutely.
So,
go ahead.
I was just saying, I'm going to play the role of the Luddite here on some of this stuff. So from what I hear you saying, where we're talking about, messaging and stuff like that, but I sort of, in my mind, as soon as you started saying that, I started thinking, okay, if I'm a company, I want to define your play box that you're allowed to play in pretty clear. But also it just sort of jumped out at me, if you're a business, you normally pass information by press release, like that's how your traditional method, like if you're a bank, you don't tweet out some new business rate, there's a press release and there's a process. And I think what you're kind of saying is that there's that part of it, which is for really certain things, but there should be sort of a larger box, which is other things, which gives life to the company. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think it's all integrated, right? So if you're a manager of a company, then what you're posting or what you're planning to do on social media or use social media for, it should also align with how your organization wants to use social media. That all has to make sense.
So it has to come first. That's the first part, right?
Yeah, and I think, to your example about a bank going press release first instead of tweeting, I would say you'd see examples now where ATB might decide to tweet about their news before they go press release. So I think it's really shifted, but I think everyone works together. So I used to work at a post-secondary as well, and so the media relations manager there and I, in the social media realm, would work very closely to make sure that if we're announcing something or if we're planning something, we're all in agreement
about. It's all complementary.
It's all complementing each other. It's not, you're not scooping one another. Everyone knows what that plan is. You add a manager into a mix, and that becomes part of that plan as well. Maybe it's news release, company tweet, manager blog post or something, but it's all part of that bigger plan.
They're different channels, but the messaging is consistent.
Absolutely. And then they complement each other.
So with that, you take the organization's perspective on something. So you have core values in your organization and you're working toward making sure that the messages get out. How do you deal with a situation where you have a manager or a president, me, who I have my NorQuest world, but I might also have a personal opinion. And I personally find it really tough because I have a hard time separating myself from Jody Abbott, president of NorQuest, and Jody Abbott, citizen. And I actually think the public also has that hard time in separating that. So what advice do you give to, I would say, emerging managers, emerging leaders who they are not only making their mark in our community, in our organization for their professional role they play, but they are starting to really have their personality and their aura kind of tied to that. How do you manage that?
That's a fantastic question. I have struggles with that myself, and so I have one account, and I'm Mac. Everything I do is the same account, right? So that's what you get. And the good thing about that approach is I think you end up with a more authentic view into who I am and what I care about. And, you know, social media is not just one post. It's going to be a ongoing conversation, relationship with people over time. And so I think that authenticity, that truth that comes with being your whole package, you know, president of the organization, mother, father, son, whatever, right? Volunteer, all of those things contribute to a bigger online identity that allows people to have a connection and a relationship. Having said that, there are other approaches. I'd love to know what Linda thinks. I mean, you could create multiple accounts, which some people do. They have a work account and they have a personal account. Some people go to extremes and have a cell phone for personal life and a cell phone for
They don't want
business
anything to
life.
merge.
They keep them very separate. I don't know that there's a correct way or an incorrect way, but you've got to find one that's going to fit, you know, your personality and your style, I think. What do you think, Linda?
Yeah, no, and I mean, I agree with you, Mac. And when I look at, you know, I usually stray away from, you know, work account, personal account, because it's you are the same person, and you should, you know, the values that you share at work should be similar to the values that you're bringing in your personal life. And I think that that stands true for if you're the CEO of a business, you know, you were picked to be CEO for a reason, and likely that included your personal values as well as your professional values, and that should all kind of be rolled up in that same vein. So I mean, whether it's the right way or the wrong way, I usually don't recommend splitting that. I think you need to understand the balance of what you should be sharing that's maybe more personal versus what you should be sharing that's on that professional side of things. But I think it's more authentic when you get both sides in one. And it's also a lot more interesting. I think people are more likely to relate to you, to be interested in what you're saying when it is a little bit of a mix of content and not just this is me at work, these are my work views. I think especially nowadays it's challenging to make that split. And I don't know if I would recommend that you should be making that split.
And I follow the person. I follow you. And if I'm going to talk to you on social media, I'm talking to Jody, not president, not NorQuest as the organization or whatever, right? I think that's a big distinction. I know obviously organizations have accounts and there's a use for those things, but when we're getting down to interacting with other people and using social media as the tool in which to do that, we're interacting with the person.
Yeah. And it's interesting because what I'm hearing is the congruence is very, very important. And I think actually that incongruence is what can get people into trouble. So,
what we have to be clear on though is that in government there are very specific directions on this. Like some government agencies, you're allowed to have two. You know, like your official account and let's say official, and there's ones where you can't. You know, like there is no mixing of the two. So probably good advice would be you got to make sure you fully understand the regulations of the organization you belong to.
Yep.
Because there might be some very
what are their policies?
Yeah, what are their policies and everything else. So like the division commander, the guy, the general who's in charge of General Cadeau, who's in charge of all the army in Western Canada, he has a military account and he puts all the stuff he's doing and it's very visual. Like if he's visiting there or going for a run or something, he puts that stuff up. But
does he also have a private account?
I don't know. I don't follow his private account. So it's
interesting.
Again, I may not be the best example for a comparative study here, but I think that's a point as a takeaway. A lot of stuff we're talking about is a civilian company where you're kind of able to some of the regulations are relatively malleable, whereas some of them are federal decree or provincial regulations, and you have to stay within those bounds.
When you're dealing with values more than regulations.
I just think we need in our minds need to sort of make sure we understand there's sort of two categories. But the lead is if you're the manager, you need to understand that because you can't give proper guidance to the people that are under you about what the policies are, what the go no-go areas are for, you know, the use of social media if you don't truly understand your position. And unfortunately, in the armed forces, I can tell you right now that's like our number one issue. What are the rules? You know, if I have a picture in my Facebook account and it shows me in uniform, can I then
your personal
be critical? Is it prison or is it military?
Yeah, exactly.
The military interpretation is if you make it and someone can clearly delineate you as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces, you can't be critical of the government and you can't do all that kind of stuff. So you got to be really, really careful. And I may have misquoted part of that, but I mean, clearly there is a line and you have to kind of separate the two. So.
Yeah.
So if you take that further, I've heard of some organizations that will actually tweet on behalf of you. So
So you see that in government, I think, a lot of times.
And when I think when I came to the college and I was learning social media, and I still think I'm learning social media, but when I started, it was actually a question I had. So, okay, you have NorQuest Prez account. Is this me actually putting what I want on, or is it the organization doing this? And, at the beginning it was, well, maybe we should do some of this for you because you're learning. And very, very quickly that changed. And it was because I think what Max said earlier, I want people to know me. And absolutely, I will make sure that the NorQuest message is out there because that's my job and because I love this place. But I wonder how much do we see that? Or do we not?
Did you tweet the pictures today at the RBC announcement?
Absolutely,
There you go.
I did.
There you go.
was
So
you.
Absolutely, I
good.
did.
Well
It was
done.
me.
Because I saw
was
her going
me.
like this, click. Like I said, well, we're going to talk about it. I sure hope she actually tweets this stuff because we're going to have a discussion
It's already
about
out
it.
Send
there.
it back to
It's already
the
out there.
system.
Yep.
No, I think you do. I see that a lot more in that government realm. So you might get ministers or MLAs and that sort of thing, where their profiles then say it's them and their team. So then you can get away with it sort of that way. But to your point and Max's point, much prefer it when I know that it is the leader or the individual who's posting. I think then you kind of run into time management or those type of questions, like how much time can this leader designate or devote to tweeting or posting on social media. And at first, I think at first, if you're new to it, it's always going to take a little longer. But you're mentioned,
learning something.
Yeah, and you're tweeting at that RBC thing. You were probably pretty quick now, would you say?
Yeah. The ones I hate is when I do a spelling mistake and it's like, okay, we're a college. Like, how do I take that back?
No edit button yet. No, proofreading, super, super valuable, I think,
Yes.
whether you're a leader or not. Anyone who's posting on social media should be, and I'm guilty of also having typos.
And it's hard, right? Because when you're at an event like that, you're wanting to be timely for one thing. You want to be on the spot. But also, like Linda and I were at an event last night, and I'm writing a tweet, and I'm like, okay, what hashtag should I use? What is the organization's account? And you got to go and do all this research on the spot. So you spend like 20 minutes figuring out what you're going to do before you actually get to tweet it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
All right.
So, but
I got to ask this question because I don't get this hashtag thing. Okay, can you explain this to the listeners who may be like me that I kind of understand it, but I don't think I do, and I'm going to embarrass myself to even try to explain it. Can you explain to me
you're
what that
getting
means?
red, Jeff.
I know, because I'm embarrassed by the fact that I have
It's
to
a
ask our
safe
guests.
space.
And only 1 million people are listening.
Yeah, that's right. It's okay. It's all right.
I'll tell you in the context of Twitter. So tags obviously existed long before Twitter, but Twitter made the hashtag the cultural thing that it is today. So when Twitter launched, it was just a box. That's all you had. You put in 140 characters or less, and that was it. And some enterprise and users on the platform thought it would be interesting and useful if we could categorize these things. If we could say that my tweet is about this topic. And they proposed the hashtag to do it, which is just anybody can come up with a hashtag. You just put the £sign and some characters, and that's a hashtag. Twitter realized this was a really good idea and then built it into the platform. And now we've seen many other platforms, many other social media platforms also embrace the hashtag. So at first it was a way to categorize your tweet. So you might write something and then hashtag it at the end. So in Edmonton we use YEG. Hashtag YEG.
YEG.
Yes.
But we've seen as people have become more comfortable with it, now people use hashtags also for, satirical purposes or as part of the words
Fun
in the
games,
message, all kinds of uses.
Context, but really it's more of that categorizing aspect. So
Right.
you want to use from a leadership or management perspective,
Right.
you want to use hashtags strategically to get your message out there. So if your topic is on, post-secondary education, you would want to look up, well, what are some of those common hashtags that people in Alberta post-secondary field are using, and you would
Okay, so
use
I
that
got
hashtag.
what a hashtag is. So can I search them? Is that the idea? Is that
Yes.
the idea? I could, if I'm interested in Edmonton stuff, I could search hashtag YEG and I can
Yes,
get
hashtag YEG.
Okay.
Well, I think
there's an inside joke that I'm missing entirely
Yeah, yeah.
between
But
the two
you're
of them
getting
here.
the inside joke.
But I kind of understand that now. Okay, so that's how you can do it. So you can look at based on your interests, and does like the Twitter algorithm kind of say, okay, he's interested in this, so when I come on, that's the kind of stuff that will be in the feed. Is that how it works?
Sometimes it could be depending on that. Nobody knows exactly how Twitter's algorithm works,
okay,
but
okay.
that's a
Right.
potential factor. But you'll also see trending topics, things that lots of
okay.
people in your area are tweeting about, and those are often, but not always, hashtags. The difficult thing, I think, for most people is that nobody owns a hashtag. There's no directory of them. There's no authority you have to apply to create one. Like they're just created on the fly. That's one of the powerful things about them and the confusing things about them.
Right.
And then I think you want to, from an organizational perspective, then sometimes you might want to create your own hashtag and hope that people will start using it, that they'll start categorizing their posts in this way, and then you'll find that they'll go and use a different hashtag, and that ends up being the popular one. You just kind of got to go with the flow. So
Right.
actually last night at the event we were at, they were using 2 different hashtags
Right.
because the organization had picked one, but then everyone else was like, well, this makes more sense.
So that the influence that happens really from society
From
and
the people,
users
yes.
of social media, that's a strong voice then.
Yes.
It's a really strong voice. And I think it's interesting from a marketing perspective because in the case that you just gave, there was a hashtag. The people themselves developed one that made sense to them. So that's incredible intel for organizations in terms of, gee, we think of it this way, but our external environment thinks of it differently.
And
so
then-
that's very interesting.
Yeah, and then that organization then started to use the hashtag that the majority of people were using as well because they saw that, well, if we want to get seen and heard in this space, then we should jump in on this too.
Yeah. So I want to take us to maybe the edge of how do we deal with controversial issues. So it can be anything from an employee putting out a message that is, let's say, contrary to the message of the organization. So I'll give you an example. We are really an inclusive organization. And inclusion is the secret sauce of NorQuest College. We're proud of it, and we're going to continue to push on inclusion. But we get an individual who happens to be using the NorQuest account, and they say something that is way offside to inclusion. So I think two questions I have is, one, how do we as an organization manage that? Because we want people to understand who we are and the roots of who we are. And then 2, if I happen to put something out that came out one way, but I meant it in a different way, so I meant it in a way I meant it, but you read it and went, can you believe what she just put out there? How do you deal with that?
Maybe one of the first things I would say is it's no different from any other issue that might come up for your organization. There's a decision to be made about whether or not it's a teachable moment or it's a reprimandable moment, right? You know, it depends on
Well
the
said.
severity
Well,
of
that's a good way of putting
the
it, yeah.
offense, right? And that's an internal discussion to each organization that's going to have different policies and values and rules about how these things are done. In the context of social media, what makes it different about social media is that there's the temptation maybe to delete it or to post a follow-up, or how do you handle it from a practical point of view on social media? One of the things I always try to keep in mind is that the internet is forever. So people have seen it. It's out there. It's been screenshotted or
Someone
saved
has screenshot
somewhere.
it, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's really not a lot of value in deleting that necessarily. I mean, maybe you can make an argument that if somebody is coming to the social media account for the first time and they're looking back through the archives, you don't want them to stumble upon that. But my suggestion is really that you should take that opportunity to not embrace it, but to acknowledge it and to say, this is not aligned with our values. This is, what we really think. We apologize, or whatever the appropriate messaging is that does align with your values, and not try to pretend like it didn't happen, because it did, and people saw it.
Yeah.
And I would, I would
go.
assume that what would happen then is if you come out, acknowledge it, apologize if you need to, it changes the conversation or stops the conversation. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm.
Often, I think that can happen.
Or
Okay.
hopefully that's what happens, right?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
sometimes it can just go rogue.
Yeah.
Because we've seen plenty of examples where you meant to say A, it comes out as B, and then once it's gone, and you can't reel that monkey back in, right?
Right. I think what I would add to that is just the preparedness that you have before you get to that point. So within your organization, whether you're an organization of 5, 10, or 500 people, do you have a social media policy? Do your employees know what the social media policy is? Are there do's, don'ts, things that your organization does not allow or would not encourage or do encourage for social media use? Is that part of your onboarding? Is the policy updated regularly? Is it from 10 years ago and it's mentioning things like MySpace and what's that net? What's the? I don't know.
There's so many that have flown by.
There's so many things that I don't even know. So just having that that plan in advance. A lot of the plans that we do nowadays includes a anticipated comments, anticipated negative reaction, and then from that we also develop proposed responses, so proposed answers, so approved key messages. So it's really a lot of in advance thinking where you can. Sometimes you don't have that luxury, but certainly if you can be prepared for, we are coming out talking about this topic, and potentially these are the 5 things that people could misconstrue about it, or it could take us down this road. If you know that and have had that discussion internally already, then you'll feel a lot more comfortable and prepared and be able to, I think, better articulate your rationale or your response in that way. So just being better prepared and understanding what those policies and what those rules are.
Because it sounds like to me like what we're saying is you can't just dip your toe into it. You got to be prepared to go for a swim right from the get-go, right? Like you gotta know that you gotta have mature policies. You got to have somebody who's in charge of it, someone who can speak to it and make sure the people who don't understand it understand it. And it has to be kind of a mature thing. You just can't kind of do it. Right? Is that fair to say? Because it says to me that if what you just said was you have to have all these pre-prepared plans.
I would say in an ideal situation.
But if we're advising somebody who's about to dip their toe into this,
like they should.
What you're saying, you just don't start tweeting out stuff. You got to think this through with someone who understands it. I mean, that's what you do for a job, right? It's like someone comes and say, this is what we're going to build this new building. We want to make everybody know about it, and we want to say what a great thing it is. We want to get the information out there. And this is a medium that we think will appeal, and they come to you and make that plan. They have to make a plan. They can't just do it off the cuff. Because I think when you look at some of the great grand disasters of social media, it was, the immediate response was, oops, and that's generally says that you hadn't considered those courses of action, so therefore it happened. So I think that's one of the takeaways here, and as you've articulated, you got to have a plan. You got to sort of lay this out, think about it, understand its limitations and the benefits of it, but you have to have a plan.
I think wading in as well to controversial issues or negative comments, even just not replying right away can be okay, so that you can take a moment to think about what you're going to say. And also, I think it's nice when leaders or individuals start to build their own social media profiles and brands, because what happens then is you start to build your own community of people who would hopefully come to your defense if there ever was some mistaken or misinterpreted post. And I think I've interviewed the Edmonton Police Service social media team before, and that's one of their key reasons why they started on social media, for example, is bad perceptions about cops and police. Now you've got this army of police officers who are actively posting, sharing their personality. Lots of people like them.
Yeah, they're doing jokes like don't drive 200 kilometers an hour on the Anthony Henday, right?
Yeah,
seriously, people. And
exactly.
I find that quite captivating. I thought that was brilliant because you get a good chuckle, but they're saying don't speed.
Still sharing their message, and then but in a likable way. And then if something does happen, or maybe something it becomes a controversy, you've got hopefully your followers there to say, whoa, wait, let's hear them out. Let's give them a chance. They're a good person. We follow them all the time.
Yeah, it's getting that credit in the bank so that when you need it, you've got your group behind you.
And it humanizes them because they're on there as individuals, right? So
you're
talking to individuals. You're not talking to this big organization that is faceless, right?
Yeah, for sure. So if you're working on a campaign, let's say, and you're getting messages out through Twitter or other forms of social media, and you get a lot of backlash on it. So you get the negative comments. And, when you talk to leaders and sometimes emerging leaders, they'll ask the question, so there was an article about you in the Edmonton Journal. Did you take a look at the comments that came in?
Never read the comments.
Well, and it's interesting because some people will say, never read the comments. And I always have to read the comments. And it's like, I don't know
Everybody
why
does.
I do that, because it ticks me off when I read it. And, then how do I react to that? So what's your advice there?
Yeah, before I do that, I just feel like I'm missing a whole portion of my life, what you guys are talking about. 'Cause I was like, what are they talking about?
We'll have to do a controversial story
I
about
think
you,
we're
Jeff.
going to have to do something because I feel like I'm missing a whole part.
Yeah.
Okay.
Badge of honor.
Yeah.
Don't feed the trolls.
Yeah.
Is my usual
Yeah.
comment
Yeah.
back to
Yeah.
that, right? So obviously, I think it's human nature to want to read what people have said and to read those comments. You probably just need to approach it in a way that you know these are just random comments on the internet, and you shouldn't try to put too much emotional weight into them. But certainly, which ones do you respond to is the question, right? Which ones do you engage on, or which ones do you take any action on, whether it's external in terms of talking back and maybe defending or agreeing, or whether it's internal about, oh, this person said that and I'm going to think about that the next time I say X or whatever. I think you just have to do your best to make sure that the ones that you are going to act upon are really in service of the sort of philosophy and approach and values that you bring to the table, and not spend too much time on the others.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't
That's good.
think you need you don't need to reply to every comment that you receive.
Right.
Positive or negative, but reading it and getting an understanding of who that person is. Even I think the nice part about social media comments is that you can click to see, okay, what else does this person post about? Are they always complaining? Are they always yelling at people? Is this someone that I should even bat my eye at or give any attention to? So there's a bit of that in it as well. But yeah, once I even think for positive interactions that you have, I always have like a cutoff limit. There's only so much. Like, we might be replying, there's 10 replies deep. It's all very positive. But then I'm like, okay, I'm done this conversation.
You've posted 5 things by then, so you can be on to the next one.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So just knowing when it's okay to step away from the conversation as well. You don't necessarily have to chime into it, but if you do chime into it, say your piece, and then you've stated what you have to say, and I'm gonna duck
Go
out
to
now.
the next
I
thing.
think I've gotten really bad at this over time. I feel like I used to be much more engaging on social media, and now I rely heavily on the like button on
Yes.
Facebook or the
Yeah,
heart
yeah,
and
yeah,
Twitter
yeah,
to
yeah.
just sort of acknowledge that I read it without actually replying.
Having to add to it.
Right.
So what's the biggest mistake you've ever made on social media?
I remember, there's a funny one. I remember a few years ago there was a peahen loose downtown in Edmonton, and I was tweeting about this thing, and I got the gender of the bird wrong. People were making fun of me because I didn't know that a hen versus a...
That's the
Right.
worst. That's the
No,
worst.
that's just a funny one. I'm sure there are some bad ones, but
I think you can say bad words on here. Okay? So, like, we'll either beep it out if it's too bad.
So I often juggle multiple accounts, so either for the organizations that I'm working with or different projects and that sort of thing. So I think one time I had posted, I was at a dinner and there was lobster, and I was like, lobster, and I posted like in all caps, and then it went out to like this legitimate organization's account where they were talking about lobster for some reason. And I'm like, oh my God. But yeah, no, I think this is probably a good sign, is that we hopefully haven't, or think we haven't really made any huge mess ups on social media. And I think it's because we, try to stay true to our values and how we engage and how we share ourselves online. And then B, we don't feed the trolls. We try not to get sucked into that.
don't dwell on it, right? Like,
Yeah.
move on to the next thing. I mean, for me, it's probably it's really important to me and to my personal brand to be accurate and to be factual, to be correct. Not correct, but to have the truth, to say something that's truthful. So if I get something wrong, that's embarrassing,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And you have that bad
Right.
feeling like, oh, I didn't do my homework. I should have been more prepared, whatever it was. but you correct it and you move forward and you don't dwell too much on it, which is maybe why I'm having a hard time thinking of them, because I'm sure I've made those mistakes.
Right.
I
But you
misread the
just-
thing or whatever.
A bunch of typos.
I should have waited, as Linda said, before posting. I should have
Right.
taken a sober second
breath.
thought or something, right?
Yeah.
I've done that before as well, actually. I got very mad at this organization once, and I had this tweet all drafted up about how mad I was, and then my husband said, "Hey, you actually do work with them, though, like occasionally throughout the year. Are you sure you want to tweet that?"
Yeah.
And just having that, even if it's not a husband or a friend or a partner who's saying that, but I often say if you have to think about or try to rephrase something so it doesn't offend or offend as much, you probably shouldn't post it at all,
That's a good rule of thumb.
because you're gonna offend someone if you
Well,
think that it might. Yeah.
And what's interesting about what you've said is how middle managers who are starting to really represent the college out there and what they do is be open to what your colleagues can give you as well in terms of feedback, because you'll be them and they'll be you, where you're putting something out and you may be wanting to take some risk in doing it, but they may look at it and go, oh, I think it's just a little too far. If you tweak it in this way, maybe it'll be better. So it's, I guess the upside of social media is you get immediate response, and you have to be prepared for that immediate response. And I've also heard you say some of it you pay attention to, and the rest of it you
don't.
filter it out.
Yeah, there's something called like a Twitter bubble, where you feel like when you're looking at your feed or you're looking at a specific topic on social media and there's just all these posts from all these people and you think it's, oh my God, this is the end of my career, or like this is crazy, and then it blows over in a day or in 2 days. And that doesn't always happen that way. News cycles are different now, so often news will pick up on that type of thing and maybe it extends it for a week or two. But the advice there is that it don't dwell on it, like Max said, but often it will blow over. And as long as you stick to, what your values are, what your key messages are, then you shouldn't, have to regret what you've said or what you've clarified.
Yeah, because I just want to talk about, because we often talk about, I often talk about mission
I
command.
still listen.
She does. Jody. Mission command is sort of like a leadership philosophy that I do, and Jody has a very similar, using different words. But one of them is, in order to do this, what's sort of registering to me is that you really have to have a shared understanding within your leadership team of the principles, the ideas of your company. Like everybody has to, they have to be able to pick that up right away, because if they're going to then tweet something out, they have to be crystal clear in their mind what are the values of the company.
And it's like within seconds,
yeah,
right?
within seconds. They
So
got to
you're
have
drafting
that.
it. You have to know to a fault. Like, yes.
They have to be right on board. And I think that is, social media is here, but what that means is, from a personal relationship, you have to have that relationship as a supervisor with your subordinates to make sure that they clearly understand, your intent, what the company's vision is, and everything else. And that is something before this medium where the employee had that ability to do that. You did lip service to it. You posted up on the company's objective in the lunchroom and said, hey, we're good to go. All right, everybody knows what we're doing. But now I think you have to be much more proactive as a leader to make sure that you're having those conversations of face-to-face, which is kind of the lead I wanted to get into, that are we losing the ability to have face-to-face because we're sacrificing it? Not sacrifice is too strong a word, but you know what I'm saying is that we are now doing a medium of which there is no face-to-face. And if you listen to our podcast, which I encourage you to do, you'll find that we
people
had
are currently listening
that's
right
right.
now.
I hope so.
We had my regimental padre was on, and we talked about one of his concerns, is that people are losing the ability to sit down and communicate and talk through issues past complex messaging, because we're very superficial, and then we use the Twitter for the complexity. So I just want to throw that as for a discussion point, because I think there is a danger here that in some cases, one end, you got to front end load it to make sure your people know what to do. But at the other end, if that is your means of communication, you're spending less and less time face to face around the kitchen table.
I think for me personally, social media has led to far more face-to-face interactions than I would have had otherwise. So I have a different opinion about it.
Well, because you're Edmonton-based, right? Like a lot of your stuff is Edmonton-related, right?
Yeah, for me it is. Yeah, that's right. And, the connections that you make through this ability to interact with people on an individual and in a mass way at the same time is really, really powerful, and we didn't have that before. It wasn't as easy to make those types of connections as it is today, right? So I think for me personally, I've led to more face-to-face interactions. I would like to see the evidence on this. People always talk about how different it is today than it was a generation ago, but a lot of the problems are similar. We could equally just have a new generation of people that are much better at brevity than previous generations. Right? Maybe that's what it leads to.
No, that's a good point.
Right?
No, that's a very good point. That's
or
a very good point.
the point of view, like you shouldn't check in on social media where you are physically because people will know you're not home. Well, that was the same fear people had about saying on your answering machine in the 50s that you weren't home. Right, because then people would know you're not there. It's the same problem, different technology, different mediums, right? So I'm cautious about saying that it's created a new problem. Definitely, we can agree that the speed and those types of things are different, but sort of the base challenges that we deal with, I'm not so sure that different.
That's a good point. No, that's good perspective.
And yeah, so for me, face-to-face has been a real win for me with social media, and I think they reinforce one another. That was the only thing I want to say about that was, the face-to-face interactions that I have get reinforced when we're not face-to-face now because we can continue that conversation with social media.
Right. I would agree with that. I have some of my very best friends today. We met online first. I think that's more and more becoming a norm. I love, and I think this is true for leaders who might want to get into social media, I love how social media has allowed people a direct line to really anyone they want to talk to, anyone they want to ask a question to, whether it's a leader or a scientist or a cool person in the community that they admire, but your paths would not cross otherwise. So again, and I do wonder. I read something not long ago where again it was sort of that idea that everyone's on their phones now, everyone's just texting. We have this lack of communication or this lack of one-to-one connection, and I just don't know if I see that. I really think from my experience and what I've seen with social media is that it has really enhanced the connections that I can have with someone, and it's also, a little bit of a time saver because I can be making connections, one-on-one, really tangible connections with multiple people, but not, we don't have to be in a room to do that. And that's a time saver for me. So I can be building these relationships with lots of people in, I think, really meaningful ways. Later on, we can meet, we can get coffee after, we can go for dinner, whatever, have a meeting. But all of that legwork, I think, can be a lot more efficient these days, which I
because
really
the people
like as well.
can feel that they've already know you when they get to meet you. They've already had a series of conversations, but you haven't had the conversation, right?
Well, and you were saying,
have, but you haven't. Right?
Yeah, you had a sense of what my personality would be like before I got here, and we've never spoken to each other before, but you get that sense of someone through social media. So I think that's very powerful
because you are authentic.
because
in your social media.
I try to be authentic in my social media. Yeah, and yes, as everyone should.
So how about changing organizational cultures? So I'm going to give you an example, and then hopefully the question will make more sense. I think it was yesterday, I do new employee orientation, and we had probably 25 new employees in the room, and I go through the NorQuest 101, our values, who we are, how we work, how people can get engaged. And I have seen a really interesting shift that has happened over the last 8 years. When I started, I had a confidential email address that if people wanted to talk to me about something, they could go through the confidential email. And I would say early in my days, I got quite a few emails. And if it was things like, I'm having a problem with my supervisor, well, no, go back and do what you need to do with your supervisor and, use a good process that we have. So I would get more emails earlier. I would say now I may get one email every 6 months on that private email. And I said to the employees, It's jody.abbott@norquest.ca, just like yours, but my name is different. So if you want to reach me, reach out to me. And it was quite interesting this morning. I came in, I had 5 direct emails from people. But what's interesting is, based on perhaps experience, generational change, who's comfortable with this, it also starts to question the hierarchy in the organization, because some of our supervisors, managers, leaders might say, that's not okay. You don't go and talk to the lieutenant colonel. You don't go and talk to the president. Now, the president invited that, so go ahead, talk to me. But how do we shift this through the benefit of social media? Because I love that people will talk to me. I don't want to not talk to people, whether it's through email, through Twitter, whatever it is. But it's an interesting juxtaposition, I think, in an organization that may have been used to very hierarchical kind of structure.
Well, but
that might have been a wandering question.
No, but I think it's great because, traditionally, if we're being fair, we're using a positive model. If I'm somebody's supervisor and that person has a problem, but that person hasn't approached me, I don't have an opportunity to try to resolve the problem, and you immediately go to my boss. Well, we've created a very multi-tiered, complex problem, and I think that's really what we're saying here is, how do we accept the fact that there's this side channel, at the same time ensuring that the employee understands, really, you should go to your boss if you have this issue first and let them have a chance to solve the problem, because that's the definition of leadership. I mean, they should be looking after their subordinates. If they're not, there is a back door, but should you just be bringing general issues up to the boss, the next level boss, right?
But is it a back door? Like, did you invite them to email you if they have a challenge with their supervisor, or did you invite them
just
to email
generic,
you about,
right?
The mission and the values and the bigger picture? Right?
Yeah,
there's a distinction there.
Yeah, so I was going to say to Jeff, I didn't see it as inviting them to go over, because I did say to them.
Okay, so you did clarify that. Okay, fair enough.
If you come to me with an issue you have with your supervisor and you haven't dealt with it with your supervisor, I'm going to send you back.
Right.
But to me, what's interesting about it, what I was inviting them to do is create a relationship with me, so I can understand who they are, so that I can figure out, can this be an ambassador for our organization that can bleed NorQuest College wherever they are.
Okay, fair enough. No, that
and
makes
so
sense.
But others may see it as, you should never talk to the president, or you should never talk to the lieutenant colonel because of their role in the organization. And so do you see
I think
this?
Yeah. So I think part of that comes back to how you're onboarding, how you're describing your organization to new employees or current ones. I think it's how you internally communicate this openness that you want to have. And I think it's not a quick snap of your finger and everyone is going to be on board with this different type of culture. I think you work towards that. But I think part of that is being open to it. And I think it's also creating, hopefully, or taking steps to create this space where people feel like, I can talk to whoever it is, not unlike what I mentioned about social media. I can reach out to whoever I want. And just sort of setting those guidelines, which it sounds like you have. If it's a complaint about your manager, that's not necessarily what I want to hear if you haven't talked to your manager yet. But if it's ideas, if it's this, if it's that, I think it's important what you said about making or building this relationship with that employee. I think letting them know that that's why you want to create this culture of openness and communication, and hopefully people will start to get on board with that. But you don't even have to necessarily hope. You can just start taking steps or creating programs or whatever it is that educates people that this is the type of culture that I want to move forward with in this organization.
I think it's got to fit the overall message, right? If it's on brand for the organization to be open and have the ability for anybody to come and talk to you or send you a message, I think you'll find it's an easier sell to get people on board with that. If it's very, opposite from the way that the perceived culture is among the team, then you're going to have more challenges, right? As a leader, you have to make decisions, and you need the best information possible to make those decisions. So it's a fantastic tool to be able to keep yourself informed in a different way about the organization than you would have had in the past. So it's a real asset for a leader, but to get people on board with it, it's got to be aligned with sort of cultural values of the organization.
Yeah, and if people are against that, I think then you start to have the discussion, well, why?
Exactly. Yeah. And I would just take it into another layer of the organization. So if that's the culture we want to create, that I want to create, are there social media tips that you can provide us with, that we can provide to our employees and mid-level managers so that they start to emulate that using social media? Is there a mechanism to do that?
I think we have sort of talked about it, but kind of that leading by example, or doing it yourself and demonstrating to your employees and your employers that you're active and you're online. I know I know a lot of organizations actually have social ambassador, social employee advocacy programs. This is a thing that they build into their internal communications that goes external, and then that helps shift the culture there. So planning, but also starting to, walk the talk. Posts, things that you're already doing, but also encouraging those managers to do the same. Like, you don't have to be afraid of posting on social media. You don't have to be afraid of showing your personality. You don't have to be afraid of fielding these types of questions. It's just walk the talk, and hopefully people will follow that example as well.
Is that a function with, if you're changing your culture? Because in the military, we're often talking about we've got to adapt our culture, and we're always in this process of transformation. That if you look at your culture and you say, listen, our employees today are looking for transparency, friendliness. They're not looking for, and I hate to say that, like in a 1960s visualization of people, everybody sitting in a desk, giant room, everybody, they're doing a counting machine, and it's very robotic. Today's businesses are trying to sell as much a lifestyle from the workforce to get the best possible employees working for them. That this needs to be part of that. It's not just the communications. It's recruiting, hiring, retention. There's a whole bunch of other management issues that this is part of as you look at it.
Yeah. And I think in terms of, what tangible tips or tangible things that you can give to employees and that sort of thing to bolster that social media is just regularly just saying, what are you doing if we're using NorQuest as an example, what are you doing in class? What are you teaching today? What were you working on? Just starting with some small question and helping that define what they post about. It's like, just post about what you were working on today and then build out from there. And then everyone starts to become more comfortable and then everyone starts to hopefully buy in to that culture change.
And what Linda said right at the very beginning is about listening, right? And being able to look at positive examples and reinforce those and use those as exemplars for people, and look at examples that weren't so positive and use them as learning moments, learning opportunities to give people the confidence that, they can change and they can get better. They can develop their skills using these tools over time.
Or examples of best practices maybe and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah, we did at one of the organizations I was with, we did a pilot brand ambassador program with staff. And it was, we encouraged or started with a small group of staff who were already social or active on social. And then from there, we sort of tried to give them rewards. And then other staff started to see, by being active on social media, I get invited to this or I get this. And then it sort of incentivizes them in that way. That's just one example or one option that can kind of hopefully mobilize employees to hopefully be more social. Also have worked in places where people are very against being on social media. So it can be a very slow change as well.
Well, I can tell you, it's an education thing. Like I got some other questions when we get to the end of this. They're a lot more basic that will be for the other people in the audience who aren't quite as swift on this. But, this is an education thing. You have to be comfortable with it. If you're not comfortable with it, the automatic human reaction is no, right? That's like,
Yeah,
I don't understand this. I don't want anything to do with it. Like,
Exactly.
keep your witchcraft away from me, right?
Right.
I don't want anything to do with
Right.
this. But and I think that's the important point to take away too. You as a manager, as a leader, you can't hide from this anymore. You need to get involved and understand it and start dealing with it, because it is the new norm. Your employees, this is the new norm for them, like we discussed before, right? This is their comfort zone. You need to adapt, in order to demonstrate that, your company is adapting and moving along, so that you're not the 1960s
Right.
accounting firm, right?
And there are studies that say, that CEOs or leaders, managers who are active on social media or just actively voicing their opinions and actively talking about what they're doing, that empowers your staff, that potentially builds customers, or more students might get attracted to the school simply because you're active on social media. For businesses that sell retail, definitely leads to purchases as well. So there's enough, I think, evidence out there that shows that when you are active and you're doing it very intentionally and you have a plan, then that you get benefits back.
So maybe, Jeff, you should go to those basic questions.
Yeah, I think so. So there'll be no laughing at me during the portion of the thing, and there's no blushing, okay? I'll do my best on that. Okay, so I know a couple of social media. I know Twitter, just because we've talked about it completely, and I'd be really silly if I didn't say I know that. And, like Facebook. But if I say Facebook to my kids, they kind of laugh and then turn away and look into their phones as they walk away from me. That's old people tech. So can we just sort of go down the stuff, like the hierarchy of the most popular to, like, if you could just sort of define some of those so that I can understand the other platforms? Because I'll admit I don't quite understand this Snapchat thing, and it's only on for a couple of seconds. And I'm really sounding old here. I was like, I'm going to take all this back.
No,
We're going to edit that part out. But
Everyone who's listening is like, thank God he asked.
Yeah. Well, why don't I start with some of the numbers, and then you can
Sure.
talk about maybe
Yeah.
the uses,
Yeah.
right? So the biggest one of all by far is Facebook, right? We're talking 2 billion people around the world on Facebook. Second biggest, third biggest are also owned by Facebook, right? So you've got WhatsApp, which is really more of a chat application, but it's used in some of the same ways as social media. They also have things like stories, which Linda can tell you more about. Instagram, also owned by Facebook. These are kind of the 3 biggest networks in the world, basically. You've got Twitter, and you've got LinkedIn is probably right up there in terms of size. Started out as a more professional place where you'd put your work history or your online CV, and has morphed into more of a traditional social network. Snapchat, you've got all the other little ones the kids are using these days, like Musical.ly, and all the other little apps that they can create content on and have friends with, and there's gamification going on in these applications to get them using it every day. So there's a wide range of them, but the most common ones you're going to run into, Pinterest and others, is Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, if you want to consider that as a social network, Instagram. Those are like the big ones, right?
Yeah, and then in terms of uses, all varies. I think all of them, what they have in common is that it allows you to share information, whether that's through a photo or a video or just text, and then engage in sort of that one-to-one, but also one-to-many conversation. So yeah, Facebook. It's funny that you say, you hear kids hear it and they're like, "Oh, I'm not on Facebook. You old people."
well, that's a direct quote from my daughter. I see that you.
I believe it.
We've talked, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think younger people are still using Facebook, but certainly you have things like Instagram and Snapchat, which has become, in the last few years anyways, far more popular. Instagram, photo sharing, Snapchat, photo video sharing, but sort of to Mac's point about WhatsApp now becoming, I think, more one-to-one. A lot of the younger people, the youths, I know, who are using Snapchat, use it in place of texting now.
Okay.
It's far more, it's a bit more private, a bit more locked down, and it has that disappearing aspect to it. Twitter, I find great for breaking news. News develops, news unfolds, news happens on Twitter, and the company itself has really aligned themselves to that as well. They want to be that platform where you get your news, it all varies. I think it just depends on if I was drilling down as examples, I might post today, I might post that I was recording this podcast on my Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and LinkedIn. But I might, I took 6 photos throughout the podcast. I might upload all 6 to Facebook in a gallery because I could sort of have that option. And I have more long-form characters. I can describe it a bit more. On Twitter, maybe I'm live tweeting throughout, although I haven't been. Trying to pay attention. But yeah, to Instagram, maybe I'm picking that best photo that I want to share, and that Instagram I think is more photographer friendly. You sort of have that aspirational, inspirational type of quality of posts on Instagram, whereas on Twitter, okay, if you post 20 tweets in a day, that's no one will even blink at that really. But on Instagram, if you posted 20 times in a day, people might say, "Whoa, what's going on here?" So it's just
at least 20 pictures and not stories,
yes.
right?
So Instagram also has a stories feature, which is similar to Snapchat, where you can kind of do more of a messy features, I guess, without.
So I think what's interesting about Linda's approach here, right, is she's not tried to post on every social network. She's picked a handful that she's going to focus on, right? So you heard her say Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And then you've posted something different on each platform to try to make the best use of what that platform provides.
Yes, so taking advantage of the features of each platform, but also understanding how audiences on each platform want to receive information or want to see the posts that you're making, and also making it worth it for people to follow you on different accounts. So if I'm posting the exact same thing across 5 social networks, why would Mac need to follow me on all 5 of these platforms? But if I'm varying it up and making it different, then there's a reason to follow you on this and that, as an example.
So I'm going to do 2 final questions, if that's okay. So who should we be following?
Linda.
Mac!
That's the right answer. There we go. That's the right answer.
No, so in all seriousness, I like to follow people who, are local. I think Mac will probably agree to this as well.
Definitely.
Everyone has different rules, their own rules, really, about who you follow. I like to follow people who I see in Edmonton, who are in Alberta, who are in Calgary. My standards aren't that high. You live
No,
here.
that means your standards are very high.
Yeah.
To Edmonton.
Yeah, but also I like to follow people who regularly engage with me. So I pay attention to that. I see a name or a profile picture pop up regularly. They're always replying to my content. They're always giving me their feedback. I'm going to give them a follow for that. And then I also like to follow people who are in the same industry as me or sort of have the same interests as me. And I think that's where your leaders, especially leaders following leaders, you'll be able to get a pretty good sense of the range of content that leaders are sharing, the extent to which leaders are wading into controversial issues, and hopefully just your own inspiration.
Yeah, I would very similar. Local for me is a big part of my brand, a big part of my interest and my passion. So that's number one, what I'm looking for. And then it would be other interests that are aligned, right? So thought leaders in, say, like I'm really into economics. So who are the key people I should be following that are sharing regularly and I trust and have high quality content and maybe have some engagement as well, right? Those are the things that I'm looking for when I'm choosing who to follow. And I'm not trying to follow necessarily everyone because you can't possibly read everything. But I'm trying to get a good sense of it, and then I like to rely on the algorithms to tell me what I should be looking at. I know most people want that chronological
I hate the algorithm.
thing, but I really like when I get to Twitter and it's like, you might be interested in this. I'm like, man, I really am interested in these 5 tweets.
The algorithm knows you well.
It knows me well. Yeah.
You betcha.
Yeah.
Okay, last question. So I've known Jeff for about 2 years. You guys are very involved in the food scene. Jeff never eats. Never eats. So
He must eat.
best restaurant. I think he only eats army rations, and he was very proud to share those with
see.
us. But best places to eat?
Best places to eat is always such a hard question. I go by genre. So you'd be like, where's your best Japanese? Where's your best Mexican? We can talk about that. My parents have a restaurant. So I'm going to plug my parents' restaurant in Edmonton here. It's called King Noodle House.
Fabulous.
They've been doing Vietnamese beef noodle soup for 21 years. So a staple, I would say.
Absolutely.
So food is important at NorQuest, so I can just see the number of people lined up to go to the restaurant.
Oh, God, yes. Don't be, my dad is very grumpy. It's part of his charm. Don't be offended. But there are so many great restaurants in Edmonton. Like you could you could eat out every day and you wouldn't be able to eat at them all. I
Yeah.
try.
I agree. I mean, I have favorites for different genres. So, like a special occasion restaurant for my wife and I is Range Road. It's a fantastic restaurant. If
Yeah,
we
like
just
Route 99.
we want something greasy, we're going to Route 99 and getting some pizza and poutine or something. I guess because I helped with What the Truck, I will plug food trucks and
Yes.
say that one of the best ways to eat in your city is to do it on foot and to get out and enjoy the fresh air while we still have it before the snow flies and it's not too cold to be outside, and try some food trucks because there's a nice variety of options from food trucks as well.
Wow, that's
And actually
outstanding.
very close to NorQuest, too.
That's true.
Yes.
There's a hot
Yeah,
spot for trucks.
we might have to do one of
There
these
you
on the
go.
road, I guess. Maybe
That's
I'll try
right.
that. So
That's right.
what I think we do before we wrap up, though, we should give, how do we follow you, each of you? So maybe you should just tell us the
Sure.
57 platforms that you're on, how to find
So you can find me on my blog. It's linda-huang.com, and I blog about food, Edmonton, lifestyle. I've been doing more travel as well. And then on social media, I'm Lynn Dork. So
Okay.
I'm affectionately as Lynn Dork. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm Master Mac with a Q, Master M-A-Q on basically every social media platform and mastermac.ca.
That's
you. All
great.
right, well, I'll certainly turn on my
And where
phone
can
and
people
figure
follow you guys? Yeah.
that.
Oh my goodness.
Our
what am
podcast-
I?
our podcast
What am
you
I?
is
can
our-
cut this.
Yeah, there's definitely our podcast.
Exactly. Yeah, our podcast. And
We'll put it in the links below when we post this up of where to find us.
Okay, that's
Because I'm actually was thinking about this whole time. I probably need to do this process. I have one, but I'm gonna try to. While Jody tries to figure out hers. Okay.
I'm
So-
just gonna check,
Ease
and I don't
into
even
it. Just creep.
That's right.
Just creep Jody for a
creep
while.
Right.
Jody. Okay,
Yeah.
there we go. Forget it.
If you want, it's jc.wilson@forces.gc.ca. If you'd be interested in joining the Canadian Armed Forces or the Reserves, just email me and I'd be happy to
Everyone's plugging
respond.
everything.
There you go.
Taproot,
Yeah,
here's like-
Oh, yeah, it's
taprootedmonton.ca,
There
Taproot
we go.
YEG on social media.
Calder
Very good.
Bateman, my day job.
Perfect. Well, listen, guys, thank you very much for coming out. This has been one of the great things I like about our podcast is that I learn stuff. And I know Jody and I, we every time we do something like this, there's always some epiphany halfway through or something. And this has been really, really good. And I think the people that listen to this are going to get a lot of really good information, both from the user, the manager, and the Luddite point of view of learning about this type of stuff and not to blush when you tell people that you don't have a clue what they're talking about. So this has been really good for me personally, and I really appreciate your efforts in coming out here, and we really do. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Linda and Mac. I think it's been a great conversation. Learned a lot, and I hope our listeners have as well. Thanks so
for
much, you
having us.
guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Leadership in Challenging Times with Dr. Jody Abbott and Lieutenant Colonel J.C. Wilson on the NorQuest College podcast. Any questions or suggestions on any episodes can be directed to us at podcast@norquest.ca. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please remember to subscribe using iTunes or Google Play and get updated when the new episodes become available. Thanks for listening.